हेलो एवरीवन, जय हिंद एंड वेलकम टू द प्लेटफॉर्म ऑफ श्रीराम सायस। आप सभी का स्वागत है श्रीराम सायस के प्लेटफॉर्म पर एंड इन टुडेज सेशन विल बी डिस्कसिंग अबाउट हाउ पाकिस्तान जुडिशरी इज बीइंग अंडरमाइंड इन द context of the 26th and the 27th amendment that had been made and is in news recently. Now you must be thinking why Pakistan's judiciary is important for the UPSC examination. Now it becomes a critical case study for the separation of power. All right, we talk about separation of power when it comes to the polity. All right, so executive judiciary relationship dynamics is important when we are talking about the separation of the power. So it is a critical case study for the same. At the same time, it is, or there are specialized judicial bodies and their impact can be seen through this, and we'll be talking about the constitutional code that has been set up in Pakistan through the 27th amendment, and at the same time there are institutional erosion patterns that could be seen, and ultimately the democratic backsliding that could be seen from this case study. And also there is the Pakistan instability that affects the complete whole region of South Asia, so it has imperative for your international relations as well. At the same time, there is selection mechanism and independence that we'll be talking about, and ultimately that is pertinent for the judicial appointments, and that is why it is important for your UPSC examination. So this topic matters because of the constitutional crisis. The Pakistan confronts the fundamental challenge to the separation of the power, and therefore there is constitutional crisis that we will be discussing. Then ultimately it is important, or this matters again because of the judicial independence. The court's autonomy systematically dismantled through the legislative action is quite a red mark, or you can say it is a red symbol when it comes to the functioning of the politics in any country. At the same time, it is a critical case study in institutional erosion as well as for the authoritarian drift, and that is why this case is important for our UPSC preparation. Alright, before moving ahead, let me tell you that if you are facing any doubts, if you are facing any problems encountering them while preparing for the civil services, you can reach out to us at Shriram's IAS through, there is a Google form in the description box. You can go through it, and ultimately after filling it, our best and trusted mentors will get connected to you. So, कहीं पर भी कोई भी problem है in your studies, you can reach out to us at Shriram's IAS. Alright, now when it comes to the constitutional structure of Pakistan, it is quite fragile. ठीक है, बहुत ही fragile है, और हमने देखा भी है इतनी बार आपका जो है आर्मी has taken control over the political situation in the Pakistan, so it is quite fragile. We have military, alright, and ultimately it is the historical power broker in the Pakistani politics. Even if there is a political system or the political appointments, still the military or the army has the power to control the Pakistani politics. At the same time, there is federal leadership that is seeking expanded control right now, alright, so that is the executive, or we have the minister and the members of the parliament there, and then we have Supreme Court, that is the final check on the authority in Pakistan. So unstable balance creates recurring, institutional conflicts and the problems in Pakistan, and that is why we have fragile constitutional structure when it comes to Pakistan. Now, what triggered the current crisis? Alright, there had been Supreme Court rulings that challenged the government's electoral strategies. Alright, so there were election verdicts. Also, the court decisions removed politicians from the office in the past, and also judiciary have questioned the civilian trials in the military courts. And ultimately, the government moved to restructure the complete judicial autonomy in Pakistan. The 27th amendment had been made, and ultimately this is the biggest restructuring of the judicial capacity or the judiciary in the Pakistan since 1973. Over here, after the 27th amendment, there is Federal Constitutional Court or FCC that had been created. Alright, this is entirely new judicial body with the supreme authority, as well as this reassigns the key jurisdiction and transfer the constitutional powers from the Supreme Court to this new court that has been established, that is Federal Constitutional Courts, and ultimately it challenges or it reshapes the relationship that is between the different branches, whether it is executive or the judiciary. That is, the separation of the power had been affected, and there is complete change in the power balance when it comes to the relationship between executive and judiciary. Now, when it comes to the FCC or Federal Constitutional Court, so over here it is the final authority on the constitutional meaning or the constitutional interpretation in Pakistan. At the same time, it has jurisdiction over fundamental rights petition as well. All right, it will have the powers, or wherever there are central and province conflicts, that will get resolved here and not in the Supreme Court, and also the disqualification and electoral cases will move to the federal court instead of the Supreme Court, and ultimately it has the suo motu powers as well, and under Article 184(3) Clause 3 of the Pakistan's Constitution, the cases can be transferred from the Supreme Court to the Federal Constitutional Court that has been established. Now, ultimately, this FCC weakens the Supreme Court in Pakistan. How? The constitutional authority. All right. So, ultimately, Supreme Court had the power to interpret the Constitution, but now that had been taken away. At the same time, the FCC becomes the final arbiter. All right, when it comes to any, new court, it holds the ultimate interpretive authority, and it can interpret the Constitution in any way, any form, and it is the final verdict that comes from the FCC, and the Supreme Court jurisdiction had been reduced, and now it is only the civil and the criminal matters that can go to the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Also, the Supreme Court effectively is subordinated to the Federal Constitutional Court, because the Supreme Court cannot overrule the Federal Constitutional Court that had been established in the Pakistan. Now, what is the appointment process in the Federal Constitutional Court in Pakistan, FCC in Pakistan? Actually, over here, the executive gains dominant role in selecting the judges to the FCC. Also, the traditional judicial leadership influence is minimized, and the Chief Justice had been sidelined from the process of appointment to the FCC, and the Judicial Commission loses the independence in the appointments at the FCC. So, supreme authority for the that has been established as per the 27th Amendment in Pakistan, that is FCC, there is completely control of the executive in the appointment process. Now, the setting stage was done, or it was already made by the 26th Amendment that was moved in Pakistan. They were, by the 26th Amendment, it restructured the composition to favor the executive representation in the Judicial Commission. Alright, now it becomes again important and a good case study, because right now the Chief Justice of India have said, and he have hinted, that the NJAC or National Judicial Appointments Commission should be revived. Alright, it should be revived, and we should have a complete transparent process while appointing the judges. So again, over here you can see that how we have a neighboring country and how the changes are being done. So ultimately, there is restructured composition of the Judicial Commission, and that favors the executive representation. And again, this is where the separation of power doctrine comes in, all right, that we follow in letter and spirits in India. At the same time, the government officials have gained stronger presence in the selection process to the judges or the judiciary, and the Chief Justice's traditional role in the appointments had been curtailed, and ultimately it has created the conditions which are necessary for establishing this constitutional court, that is FCC. So over here there is twin strategy. Through the 26th Amendment, there was, or ultimately the judicial appointments were captured through the commission reform, and there was more authority of the executive that was, or that gained through the 26th Amendment, and through the 27th Amendment there is complete judicial power which had been restructured, and there is a Federal Constitutional Court that has been established. So ultimately, executive achieves dominance over judiciary through systematic instructional or institutional redesign through the 26th as well as 27th Amendment Act in Pakistan. Now, there had been a pattern of confrontation between executive and judiciary, and that is why over here you can see the 26th, and by the 27th Amendment, the executive had tried to gain all the controls. In 1954, there was a dissolution case where the complete assembly was dissolved by the Supreme Court. At the same time, in 1970s, the Bhutto was Prime Minister, where he conflicted with the judiciary over the limits of the power. In 2007, it was the Musharraf who removed the Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry. And ultimately in 2017, the Supreme Court had removed Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, from his office. And also in 2023, there were recent rulings that sparked the current amendment push, and there were various electoral or election verdicts that were given by the Supreme Court. And that is why this is the confrontation that happens or that happened in Pakistan previously. Now, ultimately, the courts, they will act as a political actors. Because what will happen is Supreme Court frequently ruled on the various election disputes and the candidate eligibility. Alright, so there was judicial activism that was, gaining momentum in Pakistan. Alright, so there was electoral intervention by the Supreme Court. There was aggressive pursuit of the graft cases against various politicians in Pakistan, and there was corruption oversight by the Supreme Court, and ultimately it challenged the civilian cases which were heard in the military courts, and there was a complete review of the military trial. So ultimately Supreme Court over here had activism or judiciary activism that was seen in Pakistan. And ultimately Pakistan mein agar aisa ho, so, the power is shifting towards the judiciary and the military wants to control the power. So ultimately what happened was that 26th and 27th amendment were made. Now, what were the political motivations? The political motivation was that ultimately there has to be a limited interference, judicial interference in the government functioning. Alright, so ultimately these amendments that will prevent the courts from constraining the government policy. Alright, that will also, the executive will now through the FCC, through FCC, the executive will now control the election verdicts as well, and that will ensure favorable rulings on various electoral disputes that will be there. It will also neutralize the opposition support because the courts will be removed and they will be perceived as aiding the opposing or the political rivals. And at the same time, it will concentrate the federal power, centralize the authority in the executive or the government leadership. Alright, ultimately this complete change is a threat to the democratic institutions. This has weakened the checks and balances because now judiciary is no longer effective counterweight to the executive power that is there, and a proper check and balance system should remain when it comes to the separation of power between judiciary and the executive. Alright, there is an authoritarian drift as well because the institutional changes that will create conditions for the executive control, and the executive control will grow exponentially, and at the same time it will erode the public trust, and ultimately the citizens, they will lose faith in the judiciary's independence as well as fairness, and there will be a dual court confusion because now we have two higher courts or two highest courts that have been created. We have Supreme Court and the Federal Constitutional Court in Pakistan, and that will create jurisdictional ambiguity as well as legal uncertainty when it comes to both the different courts that have been created. It will have impact on federalism as well because the FCC, it will become the instrument of central dominance over the regional interest as well. So what will happen is that there will be biased decision making because the provinces, they may fear that the FCC will favor the federal government in the conflicts and disputes. There would be reduced provincial autonomy because the disputes will go to FCC ultimately. Alright, so center-province conflict, they will be resolved with the federal biasness because these judges to the FCC will be appointed by the executive at the center itself. And ultimately, when we talk about this is relevant case study for the federal tensions that we have seen in complete South Asia. Whether it is in Nepal that we have seen, along with this in Bangladesh as well, and now we are seeing it in Pakistan. Now, it is the rule of law that becomes, or it comes under pressure because when it comes to the FCC, alright, so ultimately, when it comes to the FCC, and when we are talking about the human rights cases, so it will be now controlled fully by the FCC, which is again in turn controlled by the executive. Alright, at the same time, there will be zero independent review, and it will reduce the autonomy for the constitutional challenges, and the civil liberties will go down, and executive dominance will threaten the fundamental freedoms that are there in Pakistan itself. So judicial review have weakened precisely when citizens most need protection from the state have overreach. So ultimately over here, the judicial independence is in peril when it comes to the Pakistan, that is our neighboring nation. All right, there is political selection to the FCC. There would be reduced Supreme Court autonomy and ultimately long-term institutional damage that we can see over here. So over here, what will happen? The judges, they will be chosen with the political consideration who will favor the ruling government, and that will undermine the merit-based appointments that should be there in the judiciary and create judiciary vulnerable to the executive pressure in Pakistan. At the same time, Supreme Court's autonomy will systematically dismantle, and there would be limited capacity to serve as the independent arbiter in the Pakistan itself, and the constitutional order will face permanent alteration as judicial independence will erode, and ultimately it may end in Pakistan as well. So what could be the recommendation? What could be the path forward? Now, why I always talk about path forward is this is how UPSC wants you to think. ठीक है कि आगे क्या किया जा सकता है, what could be alternative solutions that could be given. So when it comes to the alternative solutions, there is very important, that is the independent authority for the appointment. All right, appointment authority should be returned on the merit-based and non-political process, and that is that the judicial independence should be restored. At the same time, there should be diverse representation without the executive dominance in the Judicial Commission. Also, there should be clear jurisdictional boundaries that should be laid down between Supreme Court and Federal Constitutional Court, and also engage all the stakeholders before any kind of constitutional altercations in Pakistan, or remove partition motivations from the constitutional engineering and depoliticize this reform. So that could have happened, or that should have happened in Pakistan before constituting this Federal Constitutional Court. All right, so ultimately in the conclusion, the 26th and the 27th Amendment that had been done in Pakistan have structurally and politically weakened the Pakistan's judiciary. All right, it has over here the FCC that acts as a control instrument. That control instrument is in the hands of the executive. The Federal Constitutional Court, which is the new court, it serves the executive interest only and not the judicial independence that should be there in any kind of judiciary that is there. Ultimately, the Supreme Court powers had been curtailed by establishing this new court, Federal Constitutional Court, and there are democratic checks and balances which are there in any kind of democracy. They had been eroded in Pakistan, and the fundamental separation that is between the judiciary and the executive had been taken away. And also, this is a cautionary tale for India and South Asian democracies as well. So it is a regional warning that we may have for the complete South Asia. So that would be all in today's session. I hope now you have very good idea why this matters. All right. We are in India, but we are talking about Pakistan because yes, Pakistan's policies, the changes and everything matters for us at India as well, because Pakistan is our neighboring nation as well as a long-term enemy nation or enemy state that had been there right after the creation of the Pakistan since 1947. So that would be all in today's session. I hope that you have liked this session. If you have liked this session and you have liked the complete knowledge that you have gained through it, please do not forget to like the session. Also share and subscribe to our channel for more such future updates. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care and Jai Hind.